Most welcome. Good evening, sir. So we are continuing the discussion. Yogena chittasya padena vacham malam sharirasya cha vaidyagena yopa kurutam pravaram muninam padanjalim pranchaliranatosmi stuve padanjalim vyasam shankaram cha munitrayam kartra sutrasya bhashyasya kramad vivaranasya cha. We have started the Vibhuti Pada. As I mentioned in my previous class, this is part of the discussion on Ashtanga Yoga, the 8 limbs of yoga, which constitute the very essence of Patanjali's yoga system. And in the Sadhana Pada, we discussed 5 limbs. It's called Anga. So, Ashtanga means 8 limbs, 8 disciplines which constitutes yoga practice. And the ultimate purpose of this yoga practice was declared by Patanjali in the Samadhipada, Yogaha, Chitta Vritti Nirodha, etc. Now, I mentioned this earlier. In the popular versions of the printed text of Yoga Sutras, you can find the chronology of the chapters. First is Samadhipada, then Sadhana Pada, then Vibhuti Pada, and Kaivalya Pada, the 4th one. That is first Samadhi. Samadhi is very generally, in a very general sweeping translation, is concentration, but Samadhi is much more than concentration, as we are going to find out. And the reason why Patanjali, the popular versions, begin with Samadhi Pada, the reason is, according to traditional scholars, Patanjali wanted to give an idea as to what we are planning, what we are striving to achieve, which is declared in the Samadhipada. The Chitta Nirodha, that is yoga, that's what we are going to achieve. So the fundamental goals of yoga practice are declared in the first few sutras of Samadhipada, which is the first section in the popular versions of the printed text. But as I mentioned at the beginning of these sessions and also the previous sessions, the first few sutras of Samadhipada not only give us an idea of the ultimate goal of yoga practice, but also some of the definitions, what is vritti, etc., what is chitta, all these are explained there in the Samadhipada, first few sutras. But in the normal practice, first we give importance to the practical disciplines, and then the results, and then Samadhi, which is the way for liberation, and eventually Kaivalya, that is liberation, the 4th part. This is, so we decided to begin our discussion with the first few sutras of Samadhipada, because that gives the an idea of the ultimate goal that we are striving to achieve. And some of the definitions, fundamental definitions of yoga, of the terms used in the yoga psychology. First, almost 14, 15 sutras. And then we actually began with the first sutra of Sadhanapada, which is a definition of Kriya Yoga, which is the kindergarten. That's how, and that's where you begin your yoga life. That is a kindergarten. That's the alphabet. Kriya Yoga that we discussed. And then in the Sadhanapada, towards the end of Sadhanapada, you can find Patanjali is discussing Pratyahara, which is the fifth discipline. Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara. These 5 limbs of Ashtanga Yoga are described in the later part of the Sadhanapada that we already completed. And in the next chapter, the Vibhudipada, Patanjali is explaining the 6th, 7th, and 8th angas of Ashtanga Yoga. That is Dharana, Dhyana, and Samadhi. Now, one may ask this question: the Dharana, Dhyana, and Samadhi, in what way are they related to Vibhudipada? In other words, Vibhudi. Vibhudi can have different meanings. See, sometimes we say the Vibhudis of an incarnation, the Vibhudis of God, the attributes, the characteristics. Vibhudi also could mean expansion of consciousness. You know, as we ascend to higher regions of yoga practice, we leave behind the moral and ethical, and then the physical, and eventually we concentrate on some of the higher spiritual powers that automatically come to the practitioner of yoga. So that's why the word powers is the word frequently used in translating Vibhudi. In a way, it is correct, but it is much more than powers. Our mind, our awareness or our consciousness of the mind expands. It takes an ascent. It progresses. So in that sense, Vibhudi is a correct expression. So I shall try to conclude the Pratyahara section. I mean, the last few the sutras of Sadhanapada by introducing Vajaspati's, Vijnana Bhikshu. Vijnana Bhikshu is the author of Yoga Vartikam. Vijnana Bhikshu's own word. So he says, Uttani, Panja, Bahirangani, Sadhanani, Dharana Vaktavya. This is how Vijnana Bhikshu begins his commentary on Vibhudipada. So far, we have already discussed the external means of yoga. What are the external means of yoga? Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara. They constitute the external means. See, when you reach Pranayama level, when you reach Pratyahara, you already go beyond the physical. But Pratyahara itself is an advanced state, because after being established in Pranayama, you are trying to take your focus away from all external objects. So he says Bahirangani. These are all external, the 5 external means of yoga, already discussed. Dharana Vaktavya. Now we are going to discuss Dharana. I already gave a detailed exposition of Dharana in the last class, because Dharana is much more elaborately discussed in the book that we discussed last year, that is Yoga Yajnavalkyam. Yajnavalkya's discussion of yoga with Gargi, these 2 great Vedic sages. One is Gargi is a great scholar who was the greatest woman saint of the Vedic age. And Yajnavalkya was one of the greatest scholars and thinkers and saints of Brihadaranyaka Shukla Yajurveda tradition. So this is a discussion we already discussed elaborately. And Yoga Yajnavalkyam is, strictly speaking, it doesn't clearly follow the path of Patanjali. But in that book, there are descriptions of different yoga postures. But some of the higher teachings, some higher mystical meanings are elaborated with the help of quotations and references to other scriptures also. So now the definition of dharana is desha bandhas chittasya dharana. We already discussed. Dharana is fixing the mind in one place. Desha means in one place. So mind, chitta, is to be fixed in one place for a short time. That is dharana. When you extend that length of time, it becomes dhyana. So that's what we are going to discuss today. So, of course, Vijnana Bhikshu gives an idea of the Nabhi Chakre, Hridaya Pundarige, Murdhini, Jyotishi, Nasigagre, Jikhvagre, Itivamadishu, Deseshu, Baheva Vishe, Chittasya, Vritti Matrena Bandhiri Dharana. So, he gives an idea of where to focus our mind on in Dharana. That is Desha. That is fixing the mind in one place. One place means one place in the body structure. Remember, it is not a physical body, so that should be understood clearly. So in the Tantra tradition, in that huge, well-described, well-structured tradition, there are certain spots in the physical body explained, but they are not exactly physical parts. Some of them are related to human consciousness, linked to memory. So the mean dharana is fixing the mind through modification to places such as navel circle, that is Nabhi Chakra, heart lotus. Now remember, this navel circle we can understand, but heart lotus at the center of our being, imagine a lotus. So meditation is closely linked to imagination. Imagination, visualization plays a very important role in meditation, in all spiritual disciplines, in all traditions. When you think of Jesus as the eternal, transcendental, celestial bridegroom, you're actually visualizing using the imagination of a spiritual personality in the context of human life relations. But that kind of, or looking upon God as father or mother and so on. Of course, in Hindu tradition, there are 9 ways, Navadha Bhakti, 9 different ways of visualization or imagination in the devotional philosophy. So I'm not going to those details. I have discussed this in many other lectures on this platform, not on Yoga Sutra, but Sunday lectures. So this visualization is important. But visualization, we should be very careful as one drawback. Our mind should be ready for correct visualization, correct imagination. So mind is ready for this by practicing the previous 5 disciplines. That is Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara. When we practice these 5 disciplines, then our mind will be able to do the correct, the proper visualization or imagination. That's why you have to imagine focusing your mind on navel circle, heart lotus, the shining center of the head, Murdhini, Jyotishi. Jyotishi is an adjective. The word Murdhini means there is a shining, effulgent center of the head. Then Nasikagre, tip of the nose, Jikhvagre, tip of the tongue, etc. Or to any external objects. These are different kinds of dharana explained in the mainstream yoga tradition. What I described earlier in the previous session from Yoga Yajnavalkyam, that is not actually, strictly speaking, is not part of Patanjali tradition, but there is close link between the two. So many of the other books like Garuda Purana, Kurma Purana, some of the Puranic textbooks further elaborate many of these practices, which shows that these yoga practices must have existed long before Patanjali wrote these sutras. Because the methods that Patanjali only vaguely refers to in his sutra in this cryptic form, brief statements, had already been explained in books written long before Patanjali wrote Yoga Sutras. For example, I can quote one work that is from, let's say, Yatha Garude. Garuda means Garuda Purana, another well-known mythological book. Pragnabhyam hrudaye va atha tridiye cha tatho virasi kanthe mukhe nasigagre netra bhumadhye mudhasu kinjittasmat parasmimscha dharana dasakirtidaha. So 10 types of dharanas are explained in the Garuda Purana. So you can imagine how extensive the yoga literature must have been. Not so well structured or well defined, or well organized, but scattered in so many other much larger mythological books which existed long before Patanjali wrote these sutras. What this means is, according to Garuda Purana, dharana. How do you do dharana? Navel region, on the heart, and then on the chest region, on the throat, on the tip of the tongue, on the tip of the nose, on the eyes, on the region between the eyebrows, on the head, and on somewhere beyond that also. This concentration is mentioned as 10. So 10 types of dharana is explained in Garuda Purana, not in Patanjali's book, not even the mainstream commentaries, but commentators like Vijnana Bhikshu quotes all these verses from books, as I mentioned, written long before Patanjali. So that is the extensive range of literature on subjects that Patanjali only vaguely refers to in his sutras. After that, of course, we have the next sutra that is a description or a definition of dhyanam. And that is tatra pratyaya ekadanada dhyanam. That is the definition. Tatra. Tatra here means after having practiced all these 5 disciplines, yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, then after having practiced dharana, which means focusing, concentrating, or doing one pointed attention. What we do, this kind of the expansion of the level of consciousness. We do dharana, that is focusing for some time in one place. Any of the 10 regions that we already discussed just now is called 10 places are mentioned. So desha bandhas chittasya dharana. Desha means place. 10 spots like navel circle or the hridaya, heart lotus, or between the eyes, on the top of the head, and so on. We already discussed. After having done that, what should we do? We should be able to automatically stretch that focus, that attention for a longer time. Then it becomes dhyana. So dharana automatically extends to dhyana. Dhyana means meditation is the popular translation of the word dhyana, and concentration is the popular word used to translate dharana. But dharana, sometimes if it depends upon what we mean by this English translation, by this word. If by concentration you mean focusing, giving one-pointed attention to one spot for a short time, then, and if you call it concentration, then concentration can be a correct translation to the word dharana. But if you mean extended concentration, then you should understand that dharana is not extended concentration. It is concentration, one-pointed attention for a limited amount of time. In many books, sometimes 12 seconds are mentioned, and of course, this is a matter of one's own ability. Now, one important point, remember, is the dharana will be possible only if a person has already practiced yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara. And again, dhyana will be possible only if a person has already established himself in these 6 disciplines, that is pratyahara and dharana. So you will be able to fully focus your mind on something at your will, on something in which you are not necessarily interested particularly, but at your will. It's possible only if we have already trained our mind through these earlier disciplines, yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, etc. We may be able to focus on mind on something in which you have a natural interest. That can happen to anyone. But there, we don't have the freedom. See, you may be able to, anyone who is interested in football or soccer, whatever you may call it, you'll be able to watch a game for a long time with great interest, forgetting everything else. But there you are able to concentrate, almost like some kind of a dhyana, meditation, true. But really it is not dhyana. Why? Dharana, dhyana are possible only in the sense in which Patanjali uses, it's possible only if we are the masters of our own chitta. And this happens when we practice pratyahara. Through pratyahara, by taking our focus or mind away from external objects, by focusing on something within us, we are achieving mastery on our own mind. So, if we can focus our mind on something that's good for our life, that's good for our spiritual life, you'll be able to do that. This is called real dharana or dhyana or refocusing. And there you are the master of your own mind. You are not the slave of your mind. If somebody is watching a TV, a movie with great concentration, it is not meditation or dharana or anything. Because the person may be a slave. If you switch on the TV, you get upset, you get worried. Your mind is, you become angry. Why? Because you are tied. There's a bondage. You are a prisoner of your own interests. So that is an important point, remember. You remember yoga, according to Bhagavad Gita, samattum yoga uchyate. Samattum yoga uchyate. Siddhya siddhyo samo bhuta samattum yoga uchyate. Yogastha guru karmani sankam tiktva dhananjaya siddhya siddhyo samo bhuta samattum yoga uchyate. So this yoga and that yoga apparently may be different, but at the psychological, spiritual level, they are the same. Mind will be able to remain in a state of perfect equilibrium and balance only if we have freedom to accept our mind, to use our mind the way we want. So the interest or extreme infatuation to something and you are interested in it, you are able to focus on it, that doesn't show the ability to practice dharana. So that's the idea behind. Now, Another very important point is at the psychological level, practical level, if a person can practice this dharana, uh, even while doing work, even while doing great physical exertion, you'll be able to practice perfect relaxation and serenity and tranquility and calmness. Even the body is tired or exhausted. Because the idea of keeping the mind in a state of equilibrium helps us to avoid the mind getting tired. Body may get tired because it has to obey the rules of the five elements, when mind will remain always in a state of perfect equilibrium. I mean, the whole mental structure are interrelated. So at that stage, we'll be able to remain in a state of perfect equilibrium. Again, this is possible only if a person has practiced yamas and niyamas properly. Now I want to go further into this second sutra, Tatra Pratyaya Ekatanada Dhyanam. There are certain words used here, Pratyaya and Ekatanada. Tatra means on the spot. Suppose you are meditating on the Hridaya Padma and on the heart lotus. This is normally used by all devotees. Actually, this is what is happening. It seems that there is a automatic connection between sincerity, devotion, and the heart. You know, even when we assert ourselves, I said so, you don't say I said so, pointing your head. I said so means you place your hand on the chest. Chest means somewhere the heart region. So you connect your own true identity with your heart region. You don't put your hand on the chest or nose or anywhere else. We assert our personality. I said so. I thought so. That means where is the I existing? The I, we somehow automatically there is this human reflex action. We identify ourselves with the center of our being. I mean the heart region. So that's one important place where one can practice dharana. Or anywhere else, of course. It's an elaborate science. I cannot go into details in the context of Patanjali Yoga Sutras. So pratyaya actually means knowledge or cognition. So pratiyate iti jnanam. So what it means here is, so when we are able to practice this continuous flow of the same cognition, the same knowledge at that place or in that region where we are doing dharana, then that dharana, which is now extended, which is some kind of, ekatanada means without much effort, continuous extension of that dharana. It is called dhyanam. Because normally, this cognition of pratyaya needs three supports. Any kind of cognition, knowledge, subject and object, and the relationship between subject and object. So subject is needed, an object is needed, and the relationship between them. These are, it means, that is in the context of dhyana, dhyata, the one who meditates, and what he meditates upon, that is the object, and the relationship between the meditator and the object on which he meditates. Sometimes it's called jnatru, jneya, and jnanam, or grihitru, grahya, and grahana. These are Sanskrit terms, but it is very important to understand this Sanskrit terms, because if somebody wants to read more advanced books in English, in many of the modern English translations use these terms. That is, the one who knows and what we know and the relationship between the knower and the known. The one who meditates, the meditator, and the object on which he meditates, and the relationship between the meditator and objects on which he meditates. So these three, they're called alambanas in Sanskrit, or supports are needed. Now, an experience in which any one of these missing cannot be called pratyaya. So that's the real meaning of pratyaya, which is part of the sutra here. Now, in samadhi, only in samadhi, the subject and object get completely fused. One merges with the other. And the resulting experience is called samadhi prajna. It is not knowledge, but it is actually the result of a higher enlightenment. That we will discuss when the subject is discussed, when the topic comes up. Next word is ekatanada. Ekatanada means concentration. Vajaspati and others interprets that as ekangrita. It means singleness of extension. I mean, stretching, spreading beyond. That means that dharana extends, spreads continuously. That dharana continues, then becomes dhyana. When this dhyana also reaches its highest fruition, then it is called samadhi. The samadhi definition is tadeva artha martha nirbhasam sarupa shunyam iva samadhi. This is the definition. That is third sutra. This dhyana, this meditation itself, when it completely takes the form of the object on which you meditate. I mean, the subject assumes the form of the object that he meditates on, when it exists only in the form of that awareness of the object on which he meditates. Then what happens is, that is called samadhi. So dhyata and dhyanam, they almost disappear. Only dheya vastu, only the object on which you meditate alone exists. Sometimes called dheya matra chittavritti. Only the object alone meditates. And the next sutra is trayamegatra samyamaha. These three together in one place is called samyama. I will, of course, explain this further, of course. So dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. These three together is called samyama. And of course, you can find many ancient books saying that if you can practice samyama, then you can, if you can practice samyama on a spot on the human body, suppose the person has sickness, pain on one part of the body, if you practice samyama, that pain can be removed. But with that, because the samyama brings in an element of supra-physical, some kind of a transcendental element into play, and that helps you to remedy even an illness. So you can find this mentioned in the lives of many great spiritual persons, mystics, and so on. For Patanjali, you should forgive Patanjali. He won't accept, he won't agree with you if you tell him that it's a miracle. The moment you use the word miracle, immediately you're bringing an extra element. You believe in that. But I want to explain to you, you should accept that. So, but Patanjali is a scientist. He's much more of a cutthroat scientist and rationalist than many modern people. See, he puts everything in the language of reason and logic and science. That's an interesting thing. And so suppose you read in books and Hindu mythology is full of such stories. Buddhism also, Christianity also, you can find mystics, they're curing diseases and bringing relief to sick people. Patanjali will fully agree with you, but he will say it is samyama. Did they practice the yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, etc.? Somebody may ask this question. Well, any sincere, pure religious person in any tradition who practices devotion to a higher divine reality naturally develops what we now call yamas and niyamas. Yamas and niyamas are not discipline that could be practiced only by a follower of Patanjali. Yamas and niyamas are the name that we use to certain human qualities, certain qualities of the mind that every sincere spiritual seeker will automatically develop, whether that person has read Patanjali or not. That's why it's so scientific. That's what Patanjali. Suppose there is a great mystic in Spain is Saint Peter of Extremadura, and he was supposed to be a patron. He would be a great helper to Saint Teresa of Avila, who gave her protection. Saint Peter of Alcantara, that's the name. I had the privilege to go to his monastery. It was a tiny monastery in Extremadura. They say in those days, when he lived in the 16th century, it was the tiniest monastery in the world. Small place, and he lived in a place where he could hardly sit or stretch his body. And he was a tall man for those times. And it was a tiny cell where he could hardly stretch his body. And for years he stayed there without sleeping on a bed. He just relaxed, putting his head on some kind of a wooden piece extended to the wall. And it is said he came out very rarely and he didn't look at anybody, and he went on praying all the time. Now, and it was believed that he could touch somebody, he could pray for somebody, immediately that person will be benefited. And this you find in the lives of many hundreds of great saints and sages in Hindu tradition, Vedantic tradition, and also in Buddhist tradition, Jewish tradition. You find this idea. Now, where does this power come from? Patanjali says it is samyama. Now, what is samyama? Samyama is the natural ability of a person. It comes to him automatically because his level of awareness takes an ascent by practicing dharana dhyana. His level of consciousness takes an ascent, reaches a higher region. And he's able to do that because he has practiced this yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara. Then only you can do dharana. And if you done dharana, then only you can do dhyana. And this man living in a tiny home, meditating on God or Christ, he could do that because he had automatically developed this yamasana, niyamasana, etc. All these qualities. Remember. So, when you develop those qualities, then you develop this power, the mind. It is pure reason, pure logic, pure science. Just as there are many things happening in a laboratory, there could be many things happening in our mind also. Mind also can assume, can accumulate, can achieve great powers of concentration, powers that we normally do not associate in the normal human interactions, because mind is so scattered, so distracted, it's not able to practice in dharana. So it is said that, for example, dharana, dhyana, samadhi, is constitutes samyama. If a person reaches samyama, he can see his own past life cycles. And he can achieve whatever he wants by focusing his chitta, his mind on something. So you can hear, you can read about Buddha's stories, Buddha's 543 life cycles, Jataka tales you find. So his mind became so pure, so he became aware of his previous life cycles. When he became aware, all the memories and samskaras came up, and he de-identified. He refused to identify with any of them, so they just disappeared once for all. And that's why he got samadhi. This is the idea behind. That's what some of you have to remember. Many of the early commentators, some at least, quite some of the most prominent early commentators and practitioners of yoga were Buddhists, Mahayana Buddhist. Yogacara system got that name because Vasubandhu, Chandrakirti, Asanga, Dignaga, many of them. They were belonging to Mahayana system. It just got this Yogacara and Shunyavada. The Yogacara system got that name because many of these Buddhist monks were great practitioners of yoga tradition, Patanjali's yoga tradition. So that's the idea behind. So that is the meaning of this, the third sutra. That is, Tadeva Arthamatra Nirbhasam Surupa Shunyam Iva Samadhi. So what it means is that the spiritual seeker, when he completely transcends, when he is able to outgrow all forms, and only when only essence alone remains, then what happens is all the surupa, all the external things completely disappear. Then it is called samadhi. So when the mind becomes completely focused on that object, then what happens is only the essence of the object alone remains, and it is called samadhi. So this is the idea behind, and I will discuss the other subjects, related subjects later. You can have interaction today. This subject I will discuss more elaborately on this subject later in the coming versions. You can have. Of course, before concluding, I just want to focus on another important thing. It's only for general information. It's a comparative analysis of these three states. In actual practice, pratyahara enables a person to practice dharana, pratyahara, the fifth. And when somebody gets established in dharana, is able to extend the ekatanata, stretch further in the dharana, becomes dhyana, and the natural ultimate destination of this practice is samadhi. Now, from the standpoint of cognition, there are differences because it's in ascending order. At the lowest level of the samyama is dharana. At the highest level, there is samadhi. At the dharana level, a spiritual seeker will confront contrary vrittis, conflicting vrittis in the field of consciousness. That's why he is able to focus, practice this one-pointed attention. You may call it concentration because that has become an accepted word in many circles by translating the word dharana into English. So this concentration is possible only for a short time. Why? Because the contrary vrittis are still there. One may have already established himself in all the earlier 5 disciplines, yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, and pratyahara. But still, he has some distance to travel still further. So therefore, contrary vrittis will be appearing in the field of consciousness. And then these pratyayas, the different cognitions, come one after another. That's why when you try to practice this dharana, a number of memories, imageries, thought currents will come. So let us say what is dharana to begin with. Normally, when the beginners, not just beginners, but those who have already practiced for some years, they're trying to concentrate, meditate in a temple or a church or any place of worship or wherever, or maybe in a meditation place, session. What they're actually doing is not dhyanam or meditation. What they're actually doing is concentration, that is dharana. That should be understood. So that is what dharana actually is. In many of the transcendental meditation, it is transcendental concentration actually. It is dharana only. Because to become dhyana, that should be lengthened for a long time. And dhyana will produce its own natural effects on the person's personality. If a person really reaches dhyana, then he will go further to samadhi. But the majority of very sincere spiritual seekers will normally remain at the level of dharana, which itself is very good. That's why it is said at the time of meditation, you will have to face a number of contrary vrittis. That's why a symbol is kept in front of you. Some kind of soothing music is played behind. So people use different colors of flowers, lights, some background music, and so on. It's all attempt to reduce the contrary vrittis, conflicting thought currents coming one after another in a procession. So when that happens, you should try to focus on something for a short time. For that, these different methods to help you to practice one-pointed attention will be helpful. Again, confused thinking will come. Subject, object, and knowledge of different things will come. That's why when we practice so-called meditation, dhyana, sometimes we think of what we have to do tomorrow. Suddenly, and we practice this dharana, we call meditation, what we normally call meditation, though it's not meditation, it's only concentration, dharana, which itself is a great thing to practice. After doing that, you get a great relief, no doubt. But while doing it, you may face a lot of conflicts. Suddenly, one may remember the responsibility to be immediately done, some kind of deadline to be met. Something that you forgot, suddenly you may remember. You are at the time of dharana only. Because contrary vrittis are appearing, but they are much less than when you are already in your room. When you are sitting in a shrine, these thoughts will come. So that's why different vrittis, different conflicting thought currents, subject, objects, all will appear in dharana state. In dhyana state, what happens, vritti nirodha takes place, but not completely. Partial vritti nirodha will happen. That because vrittis are restrained. And the same cognitive experience is maintained for a long time. Same cognitive pratyaya, main vritti. Awareness, the same level of awareness is retained for a long time in dhyana. And the thinking becomes very clear. You may not remember something that you forgot in dhyana, but you'll remember something that you actually forgot in dharana. But we should remember dharana itself is certainly a very high state if a person has already established himself in the earlier 5 elements. But thinking becomes clear in dhyana state. And again, still, that the dhyata, that is dhyatru, dhyaya, dhyana distinction means the meditator, the object of meditation, and the relationship between the two, that is the act of meditation. This distinction will remain. And also, you will remember, I know this, this is something I know, all this will be there. But still, the thinking will be very clear, not muddled. Most beginners will practice this conflict at the time of meditation, which means that meditation is actually only concentration. It's not dhyanam, it's only dharana. Because conflicting thought currents coming one after another is characteristic of dharana state. That's an important thing to remember. Just like in a big lake and you want to clear up the lake, take a big stick and you stir, and many things will come up one after another. But need not be disappointed, because that's a process to clean up the lake. Similarly, if a person tries to meditate in a shrine, he says he's sitting in his room watching the TV, he was quite peaceful, calm, and absolutely no problem. When he tries to meditate, then all the problems arise. So meditation is problematic. People tell you, people criticize that. That's wrong, because that meditation is the first step towards going beyond these conflicting thought currents. So experiencing that, the vagaries of the mind, when you're sitting quiet in a meditation room, it shows that actually you're making progress. Because at that time you remember something that you forgot to do yesterday, you're supposed to do today, but you actually forgot. Now you remember. I go and write down on a piece of paper. That shows actually you're progressing. Dharana is happening. But it is not a dhyana, that's all. So then there is samadhi. Of course, you know, so far as the vrittis are concerned, they're all the same. Samadhi, vritti nirodha becomes complete. Of course, different levels of samadhi, samprajnana samadhi, asamprajnana samadhi, which we'll discuss in the coming chapters. So now we will have interaction. Samadhi state you discuss later. Now we have interaction. Thank you. Namaskar. We are open for discussions.
Guruji, one question. Earlier, some lectures back, you talked about 3 points of focus for meditation: Bhru Madhya, Nasikagre, and Hridaya Kamale. Today, you have extended the points to more: Nabhi, Murdhani, etc. etc. Could you give us some background on this? And also, last lecture, you talked about some bija mantras: Lam, Ram, Yam, Vam.
Yeah. I tell you, those things should not be discussed in a Zoom public class. These bija mantras and all. They are practiced only in the context of certain pujas and dharana, which should be done more or less in a very formal, not informal context. You know. Now I can only explain to you things which are normally practiced in public. That's all, you know. So these bija mantras are that's not. Remember, I mentioned that's not in Patanjali's system. Many commentators on Patanjali's system may refer to them because they were all practitioners of Vedanta. Some of them were practitioners of Tantra. Some of them were practitioners of Buddhist meditation. So you can find. And when I quoted in the last class, I was quoting from Yoga Yajnavalkya, which is really considered to be a book on Hatha Yoga because it elaborates many yoga postures. But in places, it gives some very revealing descriptions of certain subjects like dharana, which is not fully in agreement with Patanjali's system, strictly speaking. We will discuss after the session is over. Sometime we again take up that subject. Now, Vyasa's commentary, it says, it is called fixing the mind, that is navel circle, the Nabhi chakra. Many of these terms, when we use Sanskrit terms used in Indian vernaculars, it becomes very clear. Navel circle is actually an attempt to translate Nabhi Chakra. So Nabhi is a common thing, everyone knows. So they will circle. Then heart lotus, Hridaya Pundarika. That's again, there is no lotus in our heart. It's the center of our being. I mentioned this during this session. You know, when you assert your personality, you place your hand on the chest. I said so. You don't say I said so. The place where we identify with our own personality is we place a palm on the middle, in the region where the heart is located. So there we imagine there is a lotus, an effulgent lotus. And that could be one that's the easiest and most natural and most popular place for meditation, dharana. And that is safest also. That's an important point, remember. So this is one. So Hridaya Pundarika. There is no lotus, only visualization. So in devotional philosophy, in devotional circles, you can, Bhagavata Purana is full of many stotras, hymns, devotional hymns, in which the devotees address the Lord, or you are sitting the lotus of my heart. Because when you meditate the Lord sitting, being seated in your heart. So that is that is simplest thing. Second one is, of course, the third one is Murdhini Jyotishi. And then the shining center on the forehead. That is not always recommended for the beginner. Either the region between the two eyebrows, that is one, or the region in the Bhumadhya, they are not recommended for the beginners, because that can, concentration on those spots can cause headache unless one is fully established in yamas and niyamas, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana. Means mind is completely pure. Shauja, santosha, swadhyaya. Shauja means internal purity and external purity. If one is fully established, there's no problem. Otherwise, it can create problem. According to some scholars, that is recommended only, Bhumadhya recommended only for Advaita Dhyana, meditating on the impersonal, attributeless Brahman. For that. For devotees, because the majority of spiritual seekers belong to the devotional tradition. They have a deity, they have a mantra, they have a concept of a compassionate God. So it's always better, this lotus of the heart is the safest, the purest and most natural to meditate. So Jikhva Gre, Nasika Gre, etc. Tip of the nose, tip of the tongue. That's all called tip of the nose and tip of the tongue. This is normally not done by devotees, but maybe during a Patanjali wrote all this, and the commentators also wrote long back. I'm quoting from Vyasa's commentary, this one. And then, of course, in the Yoga Vartigam, Yoga Bhasha Vartigam, Vijnana Bhikshu quotes from Garuda Purana, where he gives a list of 10 places to meditate, which I have already explained. You can replay again, you can understand. I mean, I've already explained, but I can repeat again once more if you want. Navel region, the heart, again, lotus of the heart, on the chest region, on the throat, on the tip of the tongue, the tip of the nose, on the eyes, the region between the eyebrows, on the head, and on somewhere beyond that also. So you can find all this in the Garuda Purana. It's not normally recommended except in the context of intimate initiation from teacher to student. Otherwise, it is not considered to be very safe. So lotus of the heart is supposed to be the most prominent one. It is mentioned in all the devotional scriptures of the heart. The Lord sitting in the heart, that idea means. So lotus of the heart is the most natural, easiest. There are those who are interested, प्राङ्नाभ्यां हृदये वा अथ तृतीये च तदा उरसि कंठे मुखे नासिकाग्रे नेत्रभूमध्नि मूर्धसु किंचित् तस्मात् परस्मिंश्च धारणा दशकीर्तिका etc. So some of these quotations I give to give an idea of the extent of Patanjali's system and the scientific rational background. All these should not be taken to be immediately to what we worked upon. Please understand. For practical spiritual seekers, the practical level, the best thing to do is to do dharana at the lotus of the heart. That is pure, that is totally safe, and that is very universal in all traditions. You can find in many traditions, the Lord is sitting not on your head, on your heart. You find. So you can find. That's the hymns written in recent times, even in the context of Ramakrishna Vivekananda tradition, in Advaita tradition, also you can find this. Many of them Patanjali took from those times, and the commentators also, they accommodated all these from the practices prevailing during their times.
Hari Om Swamiji.
Hari Om.
Swamiji, so concentration and meditation, from what you were saying, I understand there are successive stages that lead on to samadhi, right? And so you were talking about how earlier you were talking about how yoga philosophy is a dualistic system. How is samadhi different in a dualistic system like yoga as compared to something in Vedanta, like as compared to samadhi in Vedanta?
The samadhi, as explained at the eighth anga, eighth step in the Ashtanga Yoga, is not the samadhi that we understand in Advaita philosophy. Here, samadhi is a state by which you attain chitta vritti nirodha, so that you will understand your true nature, your purusha. But prakriti remains there. Second point is, Patanjali system accepts aneka purusha vada, means every individual has his own purusha. That's an important thing. So each individual has to practice his own discipline and attain his identity with purusha. But prakriti remains intact for others. The one person who reaches samadhi may be able to attain yoga and attain his identity with purusha. But prakriti as a separate and second identity, second fundamental category, it exists all the time. So Patanjali system is completely dualistic. This idea behind. In Advaita, to make the picture more clear, in Advaita, the second category we call Jagat of Maya. It is, it exists, it appears to be real only as long as you have not attained the highest level of awareness, enlightenment. When you reach the highest level of enlightenment, then you transcend this. Then this is understood to be a state that existed only so long as you have not reached the highest state. When you reach the highest stage, you transcend this, and then you understand as a separate reality, the world doesn't exist. The world as a separate reality exists only so long as you have not attained Brahmajnanam, knowledge of Brahman. When you attain Brahmajnanam, then you understand the world that you thought to be something distinct and different and pluralistic and manifold. It has no real existence apart from the existence of Brahman. To give an example, the old example, when you mistake a rope for a snake because there is not enough light, and when you bring light, what happens? The snake doesn't run away. The rope remains the same. When you mistook the rope for the snake, it was not really the snake. It was rope only. The snake idea existed only in your mind. When you bring light, what you earlier mistook to be the snake is now recognized to be what actually it is, that is a rope. Similarly, when you get the highest spiritual experience in Advaita tradition, then you realize that the world as a separate entity that you earlier imagined to be real as different from Brahman, actually doesn't exist as different from Brahman. So remember, Brahma Satyam, Jagat Mithya at the philosophical level, Brahma Satyam, Jagat Satyam at the experience level. That is Shankaracharya. So in the Brahma Sutra Bhashya, and to the end of the Chatusutri, that's how he concludes Chatusutri Bhashya. What you mistook to be the world is now understood to be non-distinct and non-different from Brahman. What you mistook earlier to be the snake is now recognized to be the rope only. There is no snake in the room. Only rope existed. You mistook the rope for the snake. You cannot say the snake ran away. Similarly, you cannot say the world disappeared. To say that the world disappeared is like saying the snake ran away when you brought light. The snake did not run away. The snake idea disappeared from your mind. Similarly, the world as a separate entity, that idea goes away when you attain Brahmajnana. So this is an interesting, important point in Shankara Vedanta. People should study, people think that Shankaracharya said the world is unreal, etc. If it is something unreal, why should you worry about it? See, why should you write huge volumes to say something which is unreal? If it is really unreal, where is the need for Shankaracharya to work so hard, write all these books? The problem is, we all think the world is the only reality. And the world is real. And not only the world is only reality. And we don't understand the reality of Brahman. So we think, for majority of people, for those who have not realized supreme truth, the world is only reality. Brahman is mithya. Brahman is unreal. For the one who runs away from the room thinking this is a cobra, and he breaks his neck, actually. Later he recognizes that it's only a rope. Then he makes all this. Similarly, all the problems, in fact, Shankaracharya, he writes long passages, how people weep and cry. I lost my money, I've lost my home, I lost everything. What a pity. Children are dead, my house is on fire. And so people crying and weeping and weeping. It's just like you're crying, oh, this cobra is my room, it's going to bite me, I'm going to die, I may have to go to a specialist, I'm going to go to Kaiser. Because the cobra will bite me. But actually, when you bring light, it's not a cobra, it's only a piece of rope only. Once you realize that, then the fear goes away. Cobra doesn't run away. It's not killed. Cobra idea runs away from your mind. Like that, the world idea goes away from your mind. That's an important thing to remember. The question arises, the world is mithya, the world is unreal. Why should you make a big statement about it? You don't make a statement like this, there is no truck in my room, there is no elephant in my room, because there cannot be an elephant in your room. Why should you write a book about it? No. But there is a possibility that people may mistake. Because every day, every minute, you are seeing this world. You are seeing, you're hearing, you're touching, and you are interacting with this changing, fleeting, momentary world, phenomenal world. You are living in it. So naturally, people will think this is the only thing that exists. Shankaracharya only tells you, remember, the world in which you are living, it is real, but only for the time being. It changes. Every minute, every second, it changes. So, it is only relative. But behind and beyond all this, there is an eternal, unchanging, absolute reality. Once you realize this, you don't have to run away from this world. The way you look at this world will be different. You look at the world from a higher perspective. That is Advaita. Okay.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Yeah, thank you.
Namaskaram, Swamiji. Today, you talked about samyama, and you also mentioned about, for example, you can use it as a technique to remove pain. And you also mentioned about how, you can look at your, past lives and dissociate, right? Basically, by dissociation, you can do that. My question is more around what are the techniques to try some of this? What is the step-by-step process to do that for people who don't have, vision into the past lives, etc., to dissociate?
Yeah. To be very frank with you, I don't know the technique. That's the first part of the answer. Second part of the answer is this. Well, those who are sincere seekers of the higher knowledge normally won't care for this. This is an important point to remember. Anyone who gets this knowledge and makes use of this knowledge is actually heading over a precipice. Is actually walking into a trap and it will be lost once for all. So Patanjali himself warns against this. I mean, it is also unanimously warns against this. Great spiritual epoch makers, they not only the Yoga Sutra people, Yoga Sutra philosophers, great epoch makers, they have used what we normally call miraculous powers, supernatural powers, to get certain great things done. But they did not parade them. They did not formally make use of them for any wrong purpose. So in their natural life, they may have used this, but not always with a purpose or motive or anything. That's why in Sri Ramakrishna's life, this is a story, somebody suggested to Sri Ramakrishna, why don't Sri Ramakrishna had this cancer? So great spiritual personality, they don't care for what happens to the body. They may take care of the body, but if they know that body is subject to the laws of the 5 elements, so they don't worry too much about it. So somebody suggested to Sri Ramakrishna, why don't you use your power to focus on this and you can cure this. Sri Ramakrishna immediately, he was totally displaced because he thought it is a very, very bad way of using one's spiritual powers, etc. So similarly, genuine spiritual seekers will not use this. This is an important point. But they automatically they come to them. There are statements in the Yoga Sutra. They come to you. You don't go after them. They automatically come to you. They are byproducts. So in a factory, when you manufacture the main product, along with the certain byproducts also will come. You may throw into the trash. Sometimes you may sell them. But your purpose is not to produce byproducts. Nobody opens a factory and invests millions of dollars to sell byproducts. Main products only you focus on. Byproducts are part of the law of production. Like that, just as a physical level, when you exercise your body in a particular way, the body develops certain powers. It's pure logic, pure science. Similarly, the mind also develops certain powers. But they're just like byproducts. Byproducts, you may dispose of them, throw them away, or you may sell them at lower price, but you don't consider the byproducts as the supreme production. The byproducts is not the goal of starting a factory. So that's why great spiritual seeker, they did not use. That's you can find in Jesus' rejection of the 3 temptations. That's in Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov, Ivan Karamazov's fantasy poem. The cardinal is coming, look here. Why did you refuse the wise one's offer of 3 powers? And Christ didn't agree. Christ rejected. the Satan's, the devil's temptations. Christ could have used his powers to impose faith on everyone. The point is, everyone should accept the faith voluntarily. Then only you'll become. You cannot bribe somebody to accept the faith. That's what actually Satan wanted. But Christ refused to fall into the trap. And that's why he became great spiritual teacher. So you can find all great glorious traditions. Refusal to accept the byproducts. It's an important point.
Thank you so much.
Patanjali warns against this. Yeah. So thank you for those questions. So Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.